Welcome to Safe Coalition, Confronting Our Crisis. I'm Dr. Ann Bergen, co-host of this series of programs devoted to bringing the mission of the Safe Coalition out to the community. It's reminding us that this epidemic is so powerful, of such enormity, that we really must take action. But I do believe we're up to the challenge because we have people like Jim Derrick, who is the president of the Safe Coalition and creator of this series of programs, and he's graciously asked me to take part in it as an educator with an emphasis on prevention and early intervention. Jim has devoting his life to providing support, resources, and encouragement to those that are battling this disease, and certainly to their families who have to live with the painful consequences. So thanks, Jim. Turning it over to you.
Well, thank you, Ann. Speaking of devoting their lives, I appreciate that kind introduction, but the truth of the matter is we are really, really fortunate to have today Joanne Peterson, who is the founder of Learn to Cope. From a personal level, I've been involved with Learn to Cope for almost 10 years as a recipient of their services, and I go to their meetings religiously. And I'm happy to say they are now our meetings because Kathy Getchell, who unfortunately can't be here today, opened a chapter in Franklin with obviously Joanne and her staff's help, and we are so fortunate to have them. To give you a little idea of Joanne, I'm going to let her introduce herself, but Joanne Peterson has done incredible work in this field, starting Learn to Cope back in 2004, really out of your basement. And since then, the organization has grown tremendously. It now has 26 chapters in 3 states, including, 26 chapters in Massachusetts, 2 in the state of Florida, and 1 in the state of Idaho. It continues to grow. Importantly, Joanne was the 2015 recipient of the Advocate for Action Award from the Office of National Drug Control Policy. She's also a panelist for the National Governors Association on Drug Abuse, and she's also been to the West Wing to speak with Mike Botticelli and advise them on opioid policy and policy surrounding that. So welcome, Joanne, and thanks very much for coming up today.
Well, thank you for having me, both of you. I'm glad to be here. Glad to help.
Great. Could you describe, Joanne, just the early process of you starting Learn to Cope and how it came to fruition?
Sure. Well, I used to say it started in 2004, which it really did, but as the years have gone, I've realized it started when I was about 10. I've lived with mental illness and addiction in my family for many years. So as a young child, with my mom, I used to run around trying to help my older brother and sister, and then, go to school every day and try to live life, to the best to my ability as a child. And then as I grew into an adult and had my own children and got married, I thought, geez, I'm really lucky that I know so much about addiction and mental health. I'll be able to really openly speak to my children and educate them about the dangers of drinking and substances. And I really didn't think it would happen, to one of my kids. And not that my mother didn't talk to us. She did. And she's a wonderful mom. But I just felt like if there was a rule book or some sort of manual that my husband and I could have followed, we tried to the best of our ability to follow that. We were just like most American families, tried to be at all the parent-teacher conferences. We camped, we fished, we water skied. My husband doesn't even drink alcohol because he's a diabetic, so there was never a lot of alcohol in the home. And I was always worried about addiction. So when I did talk to my kids, I would say, it's in our genes, it's in our family history. I would tell them this. And then, my son, in the year 2001, the year that he was graduating high school, he had gone to a local underage drinking party in the town that we live in. And there was not only alcohol at this party, but there was crushed up 80 milligram OxyContin on a mirror that was passed around by somebody's parent.
You're kidding. Who
was a local pain patient in the town and was sharing it with his own son and then my son and 4 other boys. and one of those other boys died in 2005. So, it started really in 2004. But as I said, it's an important piece now for me to mention that I think what drove me to do what I do today, and people often ask me, how did you do this? And I don't know, really. I think it was just, the lion in my belly was awoken when it happened to my son, and it brought out the adult child in me, and it was either I do something about this or this will be the rest of my life. So even though it will be the rest of my life, I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to be educated about addiction. I wanted to be able to not hide under, the covers and curl up in a ball and try to hide it from people. Did that happen overnight? No. So 2001, he went to that party. He sniffed the 80 milligram Oxycontins that were on the mirror, and it took us a while to figure out what was wrong with him. But by early 2002, we found out he was using heroin. And it was when we found out he was using heroin that we found out where it started, that it started from this pill, Oxycontin. No one had ever heard of it back then. I had never heard of it. Once I did find out about what it was, I learned that it was, great for end-stage cancer pain treatment, or for really chronic pain where people can't get out of bed. They're in so much pain. But unfortunately, it was marketed by a pharmaceutical company as safe for moderate pain to the medical establishments. And that company, Purdue Pharma, has been indicted. They were indicted, pled guilty, and were sentenced for probation and a fine back in 2007, but the damage was done. And my son was one of the young people that made that split decision, to try something that completely changed his life and our lives forever. I will say today he's in very long-term recovery.
Great.
He's married with 2 children. He bought a home. So I want to, just before we really get into the nitty-gritty of what happens and what did happen, there's hope that, I used to think I was going to bury him. I used to actually tell people when I finally came out that, I might as well let you know my son probably isn't going to live. This is what's going on. So by 2004, my husband and I for 3 years had tried to be the treatment center. We tried to fix him. Me mainly. I was the fixer. I wanted to, I just wanted it to go away. I didn't want to go back there. For me, it was like being dragged back to the abyss of the days when I was a little girl and my brother was shooting up cocaine, or my sister was drinking herself into an oblivion. So I was going to stop that. I was going to make sure, that wasn't going to happen. So I would run around and do all of the work, and he would just get worse. And finally, after about 3 years of learning that the first detox was not the last. I know that other parents will know what I mean when I say that very first one, you really thought, oh, we nipped this in the bud, it's over. I thought that too. Back then there wasn't health insurance for kids up to 26, so once he was 18, it was he had nothing. And when you're a heroin addict, it's really hard to go to work every day. It's not very common for somebody to work every day. And this was a kid that went to school every day, got pretty good grades. He wasn't an A student. He played football, he played baseball, he played basketball. I never had to drag him out of bed. He went from that to somebody I could not get out of bed. He was up all night. He'd sleep all day. I'd be knocking on his door saying, what's wrong? Are you okay?
And at that point, you didn't know what he was using.
I didn't know. And then finally, by, like I said, early 2002, I started finding strange things, connecting the dots. But one of the big things was no ambition, not getting out of bed in the morning. And I used to think maybe he'll have schizophrenia like my sister, because when she was in her early 20s, that's when she really came down with her disease, and that was her symptom. She didn't get out of bed. She'd sleep all day, never was able to work. And it was the same thing. She was a normal functioning kid, and then all of a sudden, she just changed. So I wasn't smelling alcohol. I wasn't seeing any other signs. So I was thinking, oh no, he's going to have what my sister has. Then things started missing from the home, and I was like, oh, I think it might be a little more than that. I'd start questioning his friends that I didn't see anymore, that I really missed. The ones that used to come camping, I'd run into them and say, how come I never see you anymore? And they'd have this look on their face. I never quite understood what was happening, but I think they knew, and they were afraid to hurt me. So if there's any kids listening to this, please, if you know that somebody's using drugs, talk to a trusted adult, because it could be the matter of somebody's life or death.
That's a huge message that you're getting out right there.
It is. It is. It's not helping anyone to protect somebody, especially with the heroin and the pills, because they die.
Right, and they die quickly, and that's one of the reasons this coalition was founded, and that's the mission of this coalition, is that right now somebody can walk into any of the communities that we serve, and walk into a police station, walk up to a teacher, walk up to anybody, really, a pastor, walk to a friend, say, where can I get help? And we hope to be an arm, that's a rod that they can grab onto to provide them with some help. But that didn't exist back then.
No, but I'm so happy the work that you're doing, because that's making it so much more possible for people to come out, because the stigma is what kept me from coming out, and fear. And if we can at least let people know that, you can talk to somebody, they're not going to run around, they're not going to run over and throw this young person in jail. They're going to try to help them first, try to get to what's going on. Opiate addiction doesn't go away overnight. It takes a long time, which I don't want to dash hope, but the sooner that process starts, the better, and the younger that process starts, the better. If I had known 3 years prior, if I had the support like Jim and everyone Kathy is offering at their meeting back then, I might have gotten him into treatment so much sooner. I went to a local meeting finally after 3 years of all the different detoxes, our family starting to break apart, my younger children really suffering, and me just trying to reach this boy and not being able to get, not to be able to keep him. I felt like there was just constantly this monster pulling him away from me. I would get him back a little, the monster would take him back. It was just this constant tug of war, which my marriage started to suffer, my younger children were suffering. I would be at sporting events, my daughter's cheerleading or my other son's football or soccer games, and physically I was sitting there, mentally I was just gone. So they were starting to suffer, not that I was intentionally ignoring them, but I'd be sitting on the bench thinking, I thought I had 2 20s in my wallet. Now it's gone. And, did I hide that piece of jewelry? Because if he gets that and brings it to what detox can I bring him to? I know
the
he's
phone
using
rings and you jump and
you're just constant battle, and somebody that has a son or daughter with cancer or diabetes, you bring them to the doctor, they go to treatment, you're able to ask all kinds of questions.
You get casseroles
brought to the door.
Family's taken care of,
But when you're the parent of somebody that, I hate the word addict, I try my hardest to never use it, but when you're the parent of somebody that is experiencing this, you get treated so much differently. And after a while, you start to really internalize it. You blame yourself. You wonder, what did I do? Or did I do too much? Did I not do enough? And I started thinking, did I talk to him too much about addiction? Because now, look at him.
You want to blame yourself. As a parent.
He was dwindling away. He was literally dying in front of our eyes. So by 2004, I would go to work every day. I'd put on that face because I worked at a job where I had to greet people a lot. I worked at the National Fire Protection Association. So, that morning, I might have been Section 35ing him at the courthouse and having a judge drag him to Bridgewater to get him away from the heroin, or bring him to a different detox, or find out that he got kicked out of a detox and go looking for him. And then I'd have to go to work like this and, put on the smiling face and pretend I'm okay. And I had this little cry room. I'd go in a conference room to cry. But then eventually people at work knew something was wrong, and I started confiding in people. My boss, too, who was amazing. And he knew my son because my son would work there during the summer as his summer job, and he was shocked when I told him what was wrong with him. So one day I'm sitting at my desk, and a flyer gets thrown down on my desk, and I look, and, it says, there's a stranger in town, what parents need to know. And I was like, oh, so I'm reading it, and it's a warning about this drug, OxyContin, that no one knew anything about.
Right.
And it was Congressman Keating, he used to be Norfolk County District
Right.
Attorney
Sure.
Keating,
Keating,
who's now
sure.
Congressman Keating.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Norfolk County, and I have a family that my grandfather was chief of police for years, and so, we had a lot of, selectmen in our family and stuff, so I had known about him, so I felt comfortable calling his office, and I called, and I said, I'm one of those families this has happened to, and I didn't talk to him, I talked to his secretary, and I started to kind of cry, because by then my son was incarcerated. He ended up in jail, my worst nightmare, because as a little girl, I used to visit my brother in jail, and now I was going to visit my son in jail. He had gotten himself into some trouble. But think about it. For 3 years, in and out of detox, and there was really no drop-in center for us to go to, and there was no meetings for us to go to. The only meeting I did go to, I was told, this is not about your son, it's about you. And I'm like, no, it's not about me. He's 18, he's gonna die. Where do I go? Do you have any pamphlets? What detoxes are good? What's bad? And you'll just go to the emergency room. That's all I'd get, is go to the emergency room. Or I'd pick him up from a detox, and I'd say, what do I do next? If he relapses, go to an emergency room. Or I'd try to bring him back to that detox. Oh, no, he's been here enough. He can't come back. So
So you're dealing with an entirely broken system, entirely broken, actually non-existent.
broken isn't even,
Right.
it didn't exist.
Right. So if you had any other illness, you call your general practitioner, you get a referral, no problem whatsoever.
And you're only as well as your sickest child, so
Sure.
don't tell a mother of an 18-year-old boy that
Right.
there's nothing you can do, because I'm sorry, there are things you can do. One is get support for yourself first, because that old saying, you need that oxygen mask before you can help anyone else. You have to help yourself. It's a common saying. I don't know who invented it, but I use it all the time.
It's a good one.
It is, and it's so true. And every time I'm on an airplane and they say that, I think of us.
Yes, yeah.
And so I was looking for that oxygen mask, and then when that flyer went down, I was really, by that time in my life, I had gone so low that I guess it's okay to say this, I probably shouldn't, but if I didn't have 2 other children, I thought about ending my life, because I thought, I can't live like this for the rest of my life, because I knew what this was going to do to him. I've already seen what it did to my brother. He ended up passing away actually 5 years ago. So
Sorry.
I knew, what was coming. And I was at my lowest point, and then that flyer came down, and I think that flyer really did it. And so Keating ended up calling me back, and he said, yes, I'd love to have you come. I talked to him for a little while. I don't remember the complete conversation, but it ended with, will you come and speak at this forum? And I said, I've never done that before. I don't know. I'll let you know. I'm definitely coming, but I don't know if I could ever get up and do that. So lo and behold, I ended up on this stage in front of about 200 people at Stoughton High School, and I cried, and I tried to read. I wrote something, and I tried to read it, and I cried so much that the ink was everywhere, so I just had to talk. And I still have that, actually. It's funny.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember saying, I just want my son back. And as I was saying that, I'm looking out, and there's all these mothers crying.
Yeah.
And there's fathers going like this. Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute, I think there's more of us here. Because I felt so isolated. And when I went to that meeting, that they said, put their hand up, this is about alcohol, we don't talk about drugs here, and, I was like I felt like a leper. But then when I went there, I had all these people, I could tell they were me. I could tell they knew what I was talking about. I knew that it was other parents that were going through this that were there. So when it was over, a bunch of them came up, and it was just, I felt good for the first time in a long time. My friends would try to help me, but that didn't work. My poor mother was elderly now. I tried not to really put this on her. My husband and I at that point were not on the same page anymore. I was angry because my son was incarcerated. He was angry because he was incarcerated. Right. And, it was a tough time. And, just meeting them and getting that hug from somebody that totally got it was huge for me. And then a reporter came up to me and said, "Is there any way I can write about what you just said?" And at that point, my son was in jail. And I said, "If you give my email address at the end," yes. And my email address was learn2cope2001 because I'd be at home at night on the computer searching and researching websites about heroin and OxyContin and this and that. And my handle name was learn2cope2001 because that's what I was doing. And it happened in the year 2001. So no one would know who I was. I was Learn to Cope.
And it's still your...
it's the name of my organization.
Incredible.
Yeah, but so the reporter wrote a story. It was published in April of 2004. You can still find it today. It was in the Patriot Ledger. And at the end of it, it said, Joanne would like to hear from other parents, that are experiencing this, and her email is learn2cope2001@yahoo.com. And oh my God, I could not believe the amount of emails I started getting in the next few days. I could not keep up with it.
And this was all from parents like me, reaching out saying, "My gosh, I saw you. We have something in common. I finally have somebody that I can talk to or connect with that may understand something of what I'm going through."
Well, it was not only people that were there; it was people that read it in the paper. So I was getting emails from all over the South Shore of Massachusetts.
Was this still 2004?
Yes. Yep.
Wow, it shows you how far back this epidemic is going.
Oh.
And getting worse.
Yeah. So, I started Learn to Cope almost 13 years ago, but it's really 16 years ago that this all started with him. But you figure it was late 90s when the drug was mismarketed and caused this massive epidemic. I know in my heart of hearts, my son never would have shot heroin if he had not sniffed that OxyContin. Absolutely. And I will argue that until the day I die.
Well,
I think he would be a state police officer right now like he wanted to be.
And the story story repeats itself over and over and over. At Learn to Cope, we get 40 to 50 people. Oftentimes we'll have 10 to 15 new families entering every week, and the stories are eerily the same. And when it comes to opioids, that's where it starts. Yeah. My son started with Percocet. He started with OxyContin, oxycodone, synthetic heroin, Vicodin.
All of them.
And that's where it leads. So, Joanne, when you started your first meeting, do you remember that night?
Yeah, I do. It was crazy. So, as I said, I was getting emails from all over the place, and then there was no Facebook back then. There was none of that. So I was starting to get emails from people on the North Shore and stuff, so I think people knew people that were hurting and were, sending the story by email and this and that, and it started really getting around. So I started trying to continue to communicate. I would get all these... For some reason, people thought just because I spoke that night that I was sort of like the guru, and I wasn't. I was just a parent like everybody else. So, it was my granddaughter, my daughter, my husband, my brother, my son, my mother. It was not just kids. It was
absolutely
kids about their parents, grandparents that were raising grandchildren already back then. Crazy amount of emails, and I was just constantly trying to answer it, and I was getting so many that if I didn't answer one, then I'd get another one. I emailed you 2 days ago, I haven't heard back, and it's like, oh my God. So I called Keating, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I can't believe the amount of emails. So he's like, let's have a task force. That's when his task force started. So he asked me to be on his task force, and I started bringing all these emails. And we started our very first task force meeting, which is still today going on. It's huge now. It's county-wide. But we started, reading all these emails, and he's like, you need a website. I'm like, I know. I don't even, I still worked full-time. And so they took drug seizure money, and they set up, this message board type website where everyone could join it. Mm-hmm. And we started communicating there. It made my life so much easier. So that was our first website.
And that forum still exists today with 10,000 members or so?
Yeah, about 10,000.
Internationally?
We have people on there actually from England have joined, Canada. It's not Facebook. we really value anonymity and confidentiality. I'm okay being out, but not everybody wants to be on Facebook and say, my son got arrested the other night. I personally feel that's a little... I think the Facebook groups are great, but when it comes to really personal information, once you've got that out there publicly, that's never going to go away.
Right.
So we're very methodical about who's joining that discussion board. We make sure it's parents or grandparents or children or siblings, that we keep it to the family, so that people always know that they have a safe place. Just like our meetings are safe, we read a mission that, what's said in here stays here. I think that should be the same for the website.
So that first meeting came out of that seizure money and a website, and where did you organize? Where did the first meeting take place?
It's funny, in Norfolk County, where I grew up. So it just kept growing and growing and growing, and there was so much going on, and I thought, we need to start a meeting. Let's just start a meeting. So I called the local high school, Randolph High School, and I asked if I could have a room, and they said I could. And Keating came to our first meeting. There was probably like 30, 35 people. That meeting grew and grew and grew. We had to move 3 times to the point where there were 80 people a week in the room. It was huge. But I started forming like a process where I didn't want it to be me up there every week. I wanted it to be others. I didn't want it to be one person running a meeting. I wanted to learn. I wanted to hear from speakers. I wanted to have hope. So I started designing this meeting with everything. I sat down and I was like, what is everything I've needed and didn't get? I had no hope. I had no support. I had not much of an education other than living addiction, and no resources. I thought about that meeting I went into. So I wanted everyone that comes to a meeting to leave with those 4 things. And I always, and you've been to our trainings, Jim.
Sure have.
We want everyone to feel better when they leave the meeting than they did when they came in. There's nothing worse than walking out. I never felt so bad. It was worse. I walked into that meeting, I left lower than I did before I came in. And it wasn't intentional on these people. It was new. Heroin addiction was new to them. No one knew what was going on back then. It just sort of seeped under the doorways. It wasn't just alcoholism anymore. These people that are getting addicted are robbing gas stations. They're, doing smash and grabs with ATMs. They're taking every piece of valuable jewelry or anything of value out of a home that isn't nailed to a floor. You can't be a functional heroin addict. And alcohol is one of the most dangerous drugs out there too. I'm not minimizing that, but it can take there's so many things. There's robberies. There's HIV. There's Hep C. There's so many things, and then the family really suffers. So I tried to have it so that it could be for everybody, and started inviting professionals to educate us on addiction. I want to hear more about it. I want to understand it. Just like when my husband came down with his diabetes. What kind of diet do we need to eat? Exercise. When I go grocery shopping, I'm not going to buy a bunch of chocolate cake and cookies because, and then put it on the counter. So when somebody's addicted to a substance, you're not going to have a bunch of alcohol around. So, everybody has to learn the diet of addiction and, the manual that no one would really speak about. Back in the 70s when I went through this as a kid, I would go to different events for a family, and they'd ask about how I was doing. They'd ask about how my older sister's doing, but they wouldn't mention my other brother or sister. So I would say, aren't you going to ask me about Jimmy? And they'd say, oh, yeah.
Right, let's go into a corner.
Well, he's in Concord prison right now, but he might get into a halfway house, and we're looking for one for him now. So at 10 years old, I was sort of like trying to help him. And that's just basically what I do now, but without the secret.
Learn to Cope has become a movement. It really has, and became a movement long before I became involved. But I can tell you as a parent and as someone who has benefited incredibly from the services of Learn to Cope, I came in, sat, I'll never forget, it was a meeting in Brockton. I did not want to be there. I went with my wife at the time, and we sat in the back, and we sat with the the first timer posture.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't want to be questioned. I certainly didn't want to talk. And I was there for one reason and one reason only. Somebody in that room had the secret that would allow me to fix my son. The name of Learn to Cope is about coping with the impact of addiction and substance use disorder on the family.
Right.
So the great benefit to me, and thank goodness I hung in there and went to more meetings, and now I'm a facilitator and a Narcan trainer. But the benefit to me came when I finally understood that the antidote to my son's substance use disorder was the exact opposite of what you do with any other illness. Mm-hmm. Any other illness, you would coddle that person in your arms, figuratively or literally. You would do anything that they asked you to do. You'd comfort them. You'd wipe their forehead. You'd make sure they had a place to live and 3 squares a day and everything else. What that does is fan the flames of addiction because it makes it easier for your loved one to stay in the state that they're in. So you have to do something that's entirely against your instincts as a parent. And this is what Learn to Cope teaches. It not only does it bring all the resources that you need to the table, like instructions on Section 35 and bringing experts in the field and people that have been in long-term recovery and parents of those that have been in long-term recovery to share their stories, which is tremendously helpful.
That's the powers, and it's the sharing
very
of the
powerful.
stories.
But the other thing is uniting and literally joining hands with other people in the room and saying, we are in a fight for our lives, meaning the entire family who gets splintered by this and our loved one. We want to save their lives. And how can we do that and maintain our sanity and maintain our family unit's bond? And that, to me, is the power. It's the fellowship that comes out of that common experience with the structure that you developed.
And I like what I really think is so helpful. And I understand, the other group that I had gone to and their philosophy, no crosstalk and this and that.
Right.
I wanted crosstalk. I wanted people to be able to raise hands and look at Jim and say, can you repeat to me what was that that you just talked about that helped your son? Like, I wanted people to be able to communicate with each other rather than just, you have to raise your hand, you can't ask anyone a question. We're going to read from a book, and which is helpful. I'm not knocking it, but when you're in pure life and death crisis and you found your son overdosed on the couch the day before and you just realize they're doing heroin, you need to know, what do I do? You're in crisis. So we open our meeting with, is there anyone in crisis?
Yes.
Because that's the first person we want to hear from. We don't want them to be in the back afraid to raise their hand. Because a lot of times, even when you ask, they still might not raise their hand until the very end after they've listened to everybody and you're almost ready to close the meeting, and this hand goes up and says, I don't know what to do. And, and then everybody just helps them. So when you're in pure crisis, you need to be able to ask questions. You need to be able to, have somebody to just kind of hold your hand a little bit.
I was just curious, because you've been there watching the evolution of this disease. Are you seeing now with the more of the people who come to these meetings that more and more of them have been able to find the resources, the placements for their people in their lives, and that there's more of it? Because I know probably back then there weren't beds available. Are you seeing that change now over time based on?
I am, but it still needs work. I've seen a lot of good things come, but I've seen a lot of bad things develop too from that. So it's scary because there's always misinformation. So you have to be careful. Like, there's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet about different things that might stop somebody from asking for help. So
when you say this misinformation, can you give me an example of something that might be out there that's misinformation?
One example I can give you is when somebody raises their hand anywhere, whether it's our meeting or anywhere, and their son or daughter has been battling for 5 years, and they just aren't getting it. They've overdosed 7 or 8 times. They've slept on benches. They've been found in train stations. I'm using real analogies here.
Yep.
They're in the streets, pregnant, using heroin. They're gone. That person is gone. And that family's been trying to get them back. And then all of a sudden, all right, I'll use the young woman. The young woman comes for help to her mother and says, I need to get better. I'm pregnant. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. The mother brings the daughter to the doctor. The daughter is crying and coming out and saying, I've been using Percocet and I've shot up heroin and I feel so bad. I have this baby in my belly. I don't know what to do. There's this, you know, and as horrifying as that is, how healing is that? That's the beginning of hope for that mother, because the daughter's asking for help. But at the same time, now she needs to be put on medication. She's pregnant. So there's fear. Oh my God, I've heard that methadone is a ball and chain. You never get off it. Or, you know, what's going to happen to the baby in there? So what we like to do here is have an open heart and an open mind. Because when that mom comes to a meeting and finally raises her hand and is feeling hope because she brought her daughter to the doctor, the daughter came clean, and then someone else says, oh my God, she's on methadone. She's never going to get off that. I've been told this. I've been told the baby's going to be born addicted. He's going to be in the hospital for 6 months. How do you think that mother's going to do?
Exactly right.
And as ugly as this whole thing is, the good news, even if you can even call it good news, but for us you can, is she came for help.
That's right.
And also, yes, it's very scary that your daughter is going to be on Subutex, which is like it's Suboxone without Narcan in it, basically. Suboxone is also buprenorphine. It's a opiate blocker. But when you're pregnant, you can't have that Narcan in it. So she wasn't on methadone. She was put on Subutex. The baby was born. The mother stayed with the baby. The mother, you know, did better than she was before. The baby's okay. But how awful would that be to go to a meeting and feel that hope and then walk out because somebody thought they knew it all?
Right, misinformation. Right.
And we don't know it all. I don't know it all. Jim doesn't know it all. We're just there to help each other survive the day.
Which is, you know, the structure of the meeting that you put together in the mission statement, which I don't have here, but I probably have it memorized. But one of the key parts of the mission statement is that Learn to Cope does not endorse any one particular type of treatment. It's a peer-to-peer support group. We aren't experts. We will bring people in that have different points of view because this is a multifaceted treatment approach. There is, you'll hear people say all sorts of ways that their loved one is getting better or got better or went through recovery. And it's not up to us to do that and to dash somebody's hopes and to bring our opinions in about what is or isn't good.
Very hurtful.
Judgment is what we face. And when I say we, it's those of us that have been impacted by this illness as a family member in our case. But that's what we faced. For a long time, I said my son had simply gotten off track. They'd ask about, I have 3 boys, they're all wonderful, and they get to my son and who's affected by substance use disorder, and I'd kind of mumble, well, he hasn't found his way yet. And one day I thought to myself, really? That's how I'm going to describe somebody with substance use disorder that is raging out of control, that he's just gotten off track. And I was really broken. You know, I found myself much like you described. It dominated my thought from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. The antidote for that was, for me, Learn to Cope. Because I could literally walk into a room and by the time I had 2 words out of my mouth, other people were nodding, saying, we get it, we've been there, we recognize this. And the power of that fellowship in the structured meetings that Joanne had is something that quite literally saved my life and saved my family and my marriage. And I hear that over and over and over. So it's an organization that has an enormous impact on us that are living with this and on our loved ones, because when they see us getting better,
absolutely,
right, Joanne?
Right.
And somebody with substance use disorder, if they go into recovery and the family does nothing to address their spiritual malady, which forms as a result of all of this chaos, then that person comes back into the family unit, and we're all behaving the way we were prior to them leaving. That creates a problem, doesn't it, Joanne?
It does. And you know, there's something else to be said about it. We all suffer from PTSD. We have post-traumatic stress disorder. We do. It took me forever to get over some of the things. You know, when my son was in early recovery, if he came over, if he went into the bathroom, I'd be like, what's he doing? You know, it's like it's a lot of trauma on the whole family, the siblings, the parents, the grandparents. So we're just basically supporting each other in a room. We're not professionals, although we are. Some of us are lawyers, doctors. We're nurses, school teachers.
It's across every level.
It is, and I hear that all the time. I can help everyone else's son or daughter, but I can't help my own. It's a common thing. You hear that.
I was going to ask, do you think we're making progress in terms of educating the community about the nature of the disease, and people understand that it's not a human weakness, and the absolute damage that the drug companies did by promoting this drug, and how it changes brain chemistry, and how it's just say no, that old thing that are people out there who aren't experiencing getting it? Do you think it's changing? Do you think those attitudes are changing, and there's more acceptance that it's a disease and not just this weakness or life choice? Or are you seeing that now?
I am in some circles, but not all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like we're in this bubble. You see all this acceptance on Facebook, but it's all the people that have been affected. But then you go outside of that bubble, and there's still plenty of judgment and plenty of stigma. I've had people say to me, "Oh, I've been so lucky. My kids are such good kids."
Yeah,
right.
That's what I mean.
Right.
That's,
really?
Right.
So mine.
Right.
Oh no, I didn't mean it that way.
I know.
Well, what did you mean?
Right.
I mean, we still have a long way to go.
I'm such a good parent because we've done and it has nothing to do.
I thought when I entered parenting, like probably most parents, I thought that if I just kept my little apples all in a row and shined these guys up real nice and perfect, and had the first communion and all of the life's events took place and the photos looked good, that everything would be fine. And the fact of the matter is, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm a really, really good dad.
Yeah.
Right.
But I'll tell you something. 10 years ago, I would not have made that statement. I would have said I'm a failure because I was at the bottom. I was at my rock bottom.
Yeah.
This illness completely destroyed my sense of self, if you will, as a parent, and really knocked me off my orientation. And the power of these groups are that you find out, as Joanne said, you look around the room, you say, my gosh, this impacts everybody.
And you see a lot of fathers there, too.
Yeah.
I think that's important that we get calls in the office. Is it just a bunch of women sitting in a circle? It's like, no, we have fathers that run these meetings, like
yes,
Jim.
we do,
And we have a lot of Jims.
Yeah.
So it's funny. I think a lot of times men are afraid to come their first meetings. They think they'll be the only male there, and that's not true.
But if we can more aggressively address like the good parent, bad parent thing, I think just too many parents are in denial when this information through education, if it's a high school principal or whatever presenting, and too many of them say, no, not my child, and they would refuse to, and they could be intervening early, like you said, and before it becomes bigger.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a huge, that's still going on. Yeah,
it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and even when you find out your son or daughter is using, and you try to tell another parent, they don't want to know either. That happened with me. I called one of the other parents, one of the other boys, and boy, was he mad. My son would never do that. I said, well, you need to tell your son that I'd like my gold chain back because he has it.
Right. And you've seen the movie If Only by Jim Wahlberg.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful half-an-hour movie. It's available, by the way, on YouTube. You can Google If Only, James Wahlberg. And those pill parties do happen, and parents get blindsided. We have people come in to learn to cope, and their first introduction to their child's having any type of substance use issues, let alone disorder or illness, is heroin.
Yeah.
And they say, I can't believe my 18-year-old, I found her shooting heroin. That was the first sign I ever saw. And these aren't dumb people. These are people just like me and you that find out the hard way. And with, as you said, the introduction of OxyContin and Percocet, synthetic heroin to the marketplace, it's bouncing around on people's tables, and get it out of Dad's pill box. How bad can it be? And the fact of the matter is, it's really, really bad. One of the things that I wanted to also mention is that you are the only, I believe, nonprofit that has Narcan available, or nasal naloxone, which is an opioid overdose reversal drug. And can you talk a little bit about how that came to be and what you do at meetings?
Yes. So I think it was in 2009, or no, maybe it was 2010. we had 7 deaths in like 9 days. And the 7th death, and this was from like within our groups, and it was an 18-year-old girl from Abington, and I was at my wit's end. I mean, that's one of the hard parts of Learn to Cope is we still lose a lot of people. Right now we're losing a lot of people.
Yeah.
So that was in the beginning of me starting to try to, which I'll never get used to, all the deaths around us. But this girl, I mean, it really hit home hard. She was so young. She was a basketball star, senior in high school, and her father found her dead in her bed in the morning. And I was just completely floored by that. And this father was in such horrible grief. And I had read not long before that about that there was this thing called Narcan, that they had it in Boston, and that there were outreach workers that were offering it and training people that were using out in the streets with it. So I said, I want that. Why can't we have that? That was not the first parent from Learn to Cope that had found their son or daughter dead in their bed in the morning. And that's one of the things that, you know, you go to bed with your one eye closed, one eye open, thinking, are they going to make it through the night? You check on them to see if they're alive, and a lot of times they weren't. And I'm like, we need this. And it was all about first responders. And I'm like, we are first responders too. A lot of times we are the very first responder, the one that has to call 911 from our house. So I contacted Michael Botticelli back then. He was in Massachusetts. He was the deputy commissioner, I believe, for Bureau of Substance Abuse Services. I knew him anyway over time. And I said, how can we get this Narcan? And he's like, oh, I don't know if that's possible. And I said, well, we want it. And then I wrote an editorial that got printed in the newspaper.
Good for you.
Yeah. And he was great. I mean, he was like, I know, Joanne, but that's going a little, you know, and I'm like, well, we need it. The next thing you know, I sent it off to the Enterprise. And they printed it as a special by Joanne from Learn to Cope, and it was like, why can't parents have Narcan? And it was pretty long, and it was about, 7 deaths in 9 weeks. So the next thing you know, there was this huge meeting, and they had it in Brockton because we're on the South Shore, and they invited fire, police, parents. Michael came down, and different treatment centers in the area to have this big meeting about Narcan and accessibility and this and that. And next thing you know, about within the next year, they created the pilot so that Narcan could be more accessible than not just in Boston, because it used to just be in Boston.
Sure.
And I was elated because then I knew that way I could have them. It wasn't us yet providing it, but we were able to work with the outreach workers, and they came to our meeting. Now, back then, we only had a small amount of meetings, and that's when I learned, the very first time they came, we still chuckle about this a little bit today. They were so used to working out in the streets that they came to present to these parents, and it was all the jargon that they would use with and it was like, we don't need to hear that part, So there was some tweaking, and it was like, all we want to know is what is it, how do we use it, what are the signs and symptoms, that's it. We don't want to know anything else, even though we know it's necessary. All of that is necessary, but we can't, some of us can't hear that. So we tweaked it, and they made it more parent-friendly. And then it just got so crazy. We started losing more and more people. And so I had a meeting with the Bureau, I think it was it was December in 2011 that we became our own pilot, because it just made sense. We had enough meetings around the state. We serve probably 600 parents a week. I mean, between coming to meetings and so it made more sense for them to be able to get it at our meetings rather than going to an outreach center where they might be re-traumatized. They might run into their son or daughter
or these days into a pharmacy where there's a standing order, and that's all well and good. But if you live in any community, you're standing in line and you say, I need Narcan, you've got judgment all around you.
Yeah, we're coming up with some pretty, good ways to get around that, like a card to hand.
Right.
I would like Narcan, please.
That's right.
Confidential card. Because people do look at you. They stigmatize you. But we started training and giving out Narcan in December 2011, and I think today I know it's been over 120
It's over
rescues.
120 rescues from Narcan, and we've had 3 in our chapter in the last month and a half.
Yeah.
And these are saves from people that have called 911. They're given excellent training, and they're saves because somebody like Joanne Peterson back in 2001 and then 2004 had the guts to stand up and say,
That's what I was thinking through all this, because you
I
talk
have
about
this
people
in my family.
standing
Yeah.
up and you taking in the typing that letter to the enterprise, saying, okay, I'm not going to sit back. I'm going to do something. If there's anything in my power to make a change or make a difference in this world, I'm going to do it. And it's. But can I just ask one other question about just going back to your own childhood and your brother and sister and all that? I was just curious from your perspective when you look back, were there signs of at a young age of things that we should have noted? When I say we, like educators, parents, were there signs then?
There was trauma.
Yeah.
I will say in my own family situation, there was trauma. My parents, we grew up, we lived in Alaska. My father worked on the pipeline, and then we came back to Massachusetts, where my family was originally from. But when my parents divorced, my dad stayed in Alaska. My mom came back here, and my mom did the best she could, but divorce is tough.
I think we underestimate the impact.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't know if anything would have changed the trauma. I mean, I remember myself, all I'd hear was my dad's voice on the other line, and I would cry so much that I could barely speak. So, and my mom did bring us to counseling. So I don't even know if there was anything that could have been done differently, but there was trauma. I think it really affected my brother losing his dad, not having his dad close by.
Because I was just reading this study where they said that trauma and stress at an early age actually changes the chemistry of the brain and makes one more susceptible to substance abuse. So if we can intervene when we see this trauma in young kids' lives, I think we really underestimate the loss of a dad or those things.
Yes. I mean, I was at a conference not too long ago, and I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, that was me. And it made so much sense. In fact, they're starting to introduce it in Massachusetts through the Plymouth County DA's office, I believe. And it's a way for teachers and adjustment counselors. So if there was an arrest in a home the night before, then that young child is in school the next day. That might be why they don't have their lunch. That might be why they're tired. And they're not going to tell you, well, my brother was arrested last night. And not to do that to hurt their parents, but to have somebody that can say, can we help you, and have a snack in the drawer. And
but that's it, because when you say we have a learn to cope group for adults coming in, we need learn to cope groups for children who live in homes where this is all going around, don't you think?
Well, yes, you're really going to need it in the next year or two, because a lot of these children are being raised by their grandparents because their parents are deceased.
Right.
We see that constantly.
Or their brothers and sisters are deceased.
Yep.
Or their brothers and sisters are using.
And then the cycle's just going to keep repeating itself unless we have these kind of like exactly this model you're doing, but find a way to modify it and bring it down to the.
There has to be a safe place for them to be able to talk about
exactly.
it. I don't know what that looks like. You might want to look into what the Plymouth County is doing.
But you're right. That's got to be a charge of the schools, and that we're doing a school-wide substance use issue task force. Yep. But that's one of the things we really have to.
I can get you in touch with
that. Would
Jacobs,
be so good,
and then that way you can find out how that's designed, and I think you should.
Yeah, and Joanne, I mean, it's no stretch, Ann, to say that Joanne is one of my personal heroes, because, and I don't say that lightly, and I mean that, and I say that because it takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, I'm one of them. I want to be counted, and I want to talk about it. It takes even more to navigate what she's navigated. She's told us I'm sure the surface level stories, but to be able to get something like nasal naloxone, Narcan, and be such a good steward of that program that DPH continues to provide that, to have the wherewithal and the guts to stand up in public with Congressman Keating. It is courage, and so I don't say that lightly.
Thank you.
When I say it at all. And there are many of us, many of us in the community that feel the same same way. And I will tell you that this Learn to Cope, which I happen to have the Spanish version with me. I thought I had the English, so I disappeared off set for a moment. But this is the booklet. This is packed full of information.
Yeah.
We are distributing these liberally. Most recently, the Rentham District Court is handing this to families.
A lot of courts, yeah.
Section 35 is the involuntary commitment of a loved one due to their substance use. If they find themselves in imminent harm, you can petition the courts to do that and commit them to treatment. We have a great relationship with the Rentham courts. Not only are they handing these out, but we're having people coming directly to the meetings. We had one father who came to a meeting, and because of the education that was provided on Section 35, the next day he sectioned his son, and today his son is in long-term recovery.
Really?
And I could repeat that story many, many times, but I can tell you this group has been instrumental in my life and in many, many hundreds of lives around the Commonwealth and now outside of the Commonwealth. So I want to thank you personally for everything that you've done and your staff does.
I'm just another parent like you.
Well, you can say that, but I would take the just out because there's no such thing. So thank you very, very much, Joanne,
Thanks for having me. It was really
for
nice.
being here.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to remind people that Learn to Cope, the Franklin chapter meets on Monday evenings at 262 Chestnut Street. That's at the First Unitarian Universalist Society. We meet from 7 to 8:30 p.m. There's free Narcan and Narcan training provided. There's also drug tests available at those meetings. Most importantly, you'll find warm, compassionate people that know exactly what it is you're going through, and you will be welcomed, whether it's your first meeting or your 10th. Everybody's welcome, and it's entirely anonymous. So, again, thanks to Joanne Peterson. One more time, the SAFE Coalition is ready to help. If you or a loved one needs supportive services or treatment, access to treatment, please call our resource line at 508-488-8105. So for Dr. Ann Bergen and for Joanne Peterson, I'm Jim Derrick saying thanks for watching.
This program was made possible by your Franklin friends and neighbors, good folks just like you. Thanks for supporting Franklin TV. And thanks for watching.